We are now moving into this next session, and in fact it does pick up on one of the issues, one of the platforms, planks, pillars, whatever the P word was, around training and workforce development as well. So this session is about, well, essentially it's a question to a degree, and three people who might attempt to answer it in some way and out there to the audience as well, about what skills, knowledges and workforces do we need into the future in the humanities and more broadly. We are joined by Professor Jean Burgess, who's the Director of Digital Media Research. You can read that up there at QUT. Associate Professor Mitchell Whitelaw from the Australian National University, and Joy Damousi, who you've seen earlier on today. Joy is also the leading Chief Investigator of our Future Humanities Workforce project. We've shuffled the order a little bit, and we've got Joy speaking first, so I shall just work you through poor old...
Oh, no spoilers.
No, well, I'm not. Don't look, don't look! Because Joy's got... Hang on. They are. So Joy's up first. Here's her PowerPoint. And what we'll do is we'll have each of the presenters come on up, and then we'll have questions at the end.
So, yes, so thank you, Kylie. And we've been asked to talk for about 10 minutes or so I'll have to get through this quite quickly that way. So, as Kylie said, this project is called the Future Humanities Workforce project. I'm the Chief CI with Jane Lydon and Graham Oppie. And, of course, Kylie and Eva Glisick is on the team. And the whole point of this project is to look at and investigate the contribution and preparedness of Australia's humanities research workforce for the future of work in the academy and beyond. I don't have to remind this audience that Australia's humanities sector makes a vital contribution to the prosperity of Australia and our nation, and the humanities graduates comprise a major part of Australian workforce, and our higher ed and research ecosystem is vital to our culture and our economy. So this project has a number of objectives, and I'll just go through them here. It is to provide a new account of Australia's humanities research workforce, both within the academy and outside of it. So we are looking at both within the university system and outside of it, but particularly around Australian humanities research workforce, looking at the analysis of the trends that will shape the future profile of this workforce, and provide an understanding of additional knowledge and skills that will be required to ensure its ongoing resilience in the future. So our aims are to enhance the understanding of workforce issues, opportunities and challenges, and to identify programs, policies, practices and interventions that could be used to address key pressure points and asymmetries in our system. So here are the streams of inquiry. We're focusing on three interrelated streams of inquiry, three themes, if you like. I mean, it's obviously a vast theme and a vast issue, and there's lots of work that's been done in this space. So what we're looking at are three areas. One is the skill sets and knowledge that will be needed by the future humanities workforce, both for teaching and research, including obviously digital and data literacy. The second is support systems for early career humanities researchers, what they are now, what they're going to be needing to be in the future. And a huge one that I think we can all relate to here is workforce diversity and gender equity in the workforce. So where this project is at now is that we've pulled together a consultation paper, and the consultation paper is going to be distributed really now, and we're after feedback and input from all sectors, the higher ed sector, humanities researchers, teachers, graduates, professional associations, government, policymakers, industry, non-for-profits. We're going out to all those, and we want to engage with these stakeholders across all sections to develop a comprehensive understanding of these issues associated with the future humanities research workforce, including current capability and demographics of this workforce and the skills and knowledge that this workforce will require. So what I'm going to do for the rest of the time I'm presenting here is to just go through some of the consultation questions and get people thinking about them, because this is what we're really wanting from the sector back to us to start building our sort of profile and knowledge within and embed it within our paper. This material will also be fed into the Academy's electoral strategy. So the Academy is developing that. As you would all know, we're on the cusp of an election, and so much of this material will find its way into what we are trying to advocate to politicians and to government bodies as we move forward. So that's a sort of vital, immediate area that some of this material will feed into. So just going through some of the questions we'll be addressing and looking at. What are humanities research and humanities graduates more broadly most distinctive and important skills and capabilities? What are the capability gaps? Which are most valued, and what are they? Where are they used? And what are future knowledge, skills, and capabilities that humanities researchers will require? What can the humanities contribute to data and data literacy agenda over the next decade? And obviously, the forum, this forum here, is going to be vital in feeding into that question, and I hope people will provide to us, substantial data around that. So obviously the ECRs are the future, and they're a major group that we are focusing on in this project. And so some of the questions surrounding the ECRs are: what are the best practice models for supporting our early career researchers? Do ECRs in the humanities experience different or additional challenges compared to their peers in other disciplines? Do ECRs experience additional challenges compared to mid-career and senior staff? And what do ECRs see as challenges in their career progression? And how do we track better the career trajectories of ECRs? Now, other academies around the world, notably in the US and in Britain, have undertaken major studies along these lines. The British Academy has a very rich body of material around this, as does the National Academies of Humanities and Sciences in the US. We're sort of following a little bit of what they're doing, but we'd like a picture for Australia. The last question, or the last issue around their career trajectory, we know is around casualisation, which is a massive, massive development in the last 10, 15 years even in our sector. And so questions of casualisation are going to really feed into this. And we're drawing on surveys and information that many of the professional associations are giving us around their ECRs. But we want to track this sort of career progression of ECRs now, and where that might lead, where they might lead into the future. Workforce diversity and gender equity, obviously another major area of concern and issue within the humanities workforce sector. What are the most pressing inequities in the humanities workforce today? We know that areas around gender, we look at, in many disciplines, especially in the humanities, there is an overrepresentation of women at the lower ends of the ranks, if I can put it that way. But as you get more senior, there are fewer women, and so at the very senior ranks at our tertiary institutions are still predominantly male. And what are the challenges of achieving a more inclusive agenda? We all know about Athena Swan and the major initiative through Athena Swan in promoting women in science, technology, engineering and mathematics, as well as the race equality charters. Can we use some of these tools as useful models for how we might shape a humanities sort of program or humanities framework for promoting women in the humanities? Right, so that's the parameter of the project. It's an ARC Learned Academy Special Project funded program. So this is where we're at the moment. We have done a literature review and a policy review, and we have started to gather preliminary data analysis. Now we are looking at calling for evidence. We're hoping to stage or host, if you like, targeted workshops throughout this year on our three themes: women in the humanities, future skills and ECRs, to try and get feedback from those groups, as well as I said, going out through the consultation paper to the sector more broadly. And once we have that data and information, obviously we'll gather it together into a consolidated report, which is the final and third stage of the document. The Humanities Academy has taken the initiative on this because we feel that while many groups have worked on this individually, there is no one organisation really that has brought these three issues together. We believe that data, using that word now, Jennifer, I'm sort of very self-conscious of using it. It doesn't come easily to me as a historian, but you know, digital literacy is a major part of all of those three points. So we're definitely going to embed a lot of what we've heard today through Jennifer's paper and through everybody's papers today around the need for that. Again, joining the dots around this is really, really important, I think, as we move forward. And picking up on Jennifer's point about the humanities having a place at the policy table and at other conversations and making interventions into those political and public policy forums, very important to position humanities as central to the future skills workforce of this country and internationally. We haven't got AI in the slides, but we all know AI is a vital and really important future framework for discussion around future workforce. We have tried in every forum we possibly can to date to inject in that discussion a discussion about the importance of humanities, particularly around philosophy and ethics in AI, but that's just one example. So I think the overall theme of the project is to impress on politicians and others in our society, culturally, politically, that humanities are central to the future workforce of the country. It's not just STEM as we move forward. And in this document, we're trying to identify the skill set that humanities can contribute to that future, as well as right now, and prepare our ECRs into you know, decades to come of positioning themselves strongly in that space. The gender issue is with us. Diversity and inclusion is a massive problem in our workforce, in the workforce we're looking at, and so that too is one that we're very keen to identify and really confront and think through some strategies about how we can address those inequities. So joining the dots, we're trying to really move forward and move the humanities forward through this project. Thank you very much.
I'll just now go backwards through all the... Oh, what do I use, a mouse or what? Which is the keyboard? This one?
I might be doing it back up in the...
Don't look.
No, it's not being projected at the moment, so you're okay.
Oh, good, it's secret. So not only may we not know agree what data is, but once you do, you don't know how to say it. I've learned in my travels there are at least 4 pronunciations. Data, 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 and data. So I'm, as Kylie said, I'm a Professor of Digital Media and Director of the QUT Digital Media Research Centre, which is based within the Creative Industries faculty in the School of Communication. Our main disciplinary base is Communication and Media Studies, but we have a very strong cohort of law researchers as well. So just to sort of ground all of this in the particular part of the humanities and or arts and social sciences that I'm coming from. And I'm going to talk about these challenges around workforce futures, training and skills from a disciplinary and methodological perspective. And the particular flavour of methodology I want to talk about is this thing called digital methods, which I need to just do a bit of ground clearing around, because I can hear you all thinking, well, what does that mean? We all use digital technologies, we all use data. But what I mean is kind of a subfield of internet media communication and cultural studies called digital methods, where following on but expanding significantly on the work of Richard Rogers and his fabulous team at the University of Amsterdam, we think about using the methods of the medium to understand how the medium is operating in and through media culture and society. So in other words, for example, using Google search results to understand not only what is available via Google, but how the recursive operations of Google search are shaping the field of knowledge on that thing. So that's enough of that. because it's late and we're between you and drinks, right? So, and the point that I want to make and the story that I'm going to tell is about how digital methods have co-evolved with the digital media environment. So from the early days of tracking links among organisational web pages to get a sense of organisational networks and how they might be amplified by internet affordances, to these days trying to figure out how platforms are actually operating on our culture. So many of you will have seen a lot of stuff in the news this week, particularly about Christchurch and the social media platforms. So a bit of a history here. There was a sort of huge gold rush where we all learnt to pronounce data 4 different ways in the 2000s, where particularly Twitter, but other platforms as well, became known as potential sources of really valuable social or cultural or behavioural data, depending on your flavour. These APIs were actually originally built to enable third-party developers to build apps for the benefit of users of those platforms. And so researchers have always been sort of riding along in the slipstream of the commercial web. And so that's one of the main points. And so we're always in this relationship of creative and critical tension with what's going on with the proprietary web. So big social data research became this very large, messy, often confused space. Bernhard Rieder and Theo Röhler call it a trading zone, but I'd say it was a very troubled trading zone between not only computer science and humanities or social scientists, but where all kinds of people from the far reaches of STEM to the kind of world that we all work in, were all using the same data, the same APIs, the same data structures, to do very similar operations with incredibly different purposes. So behavioural scientists might see Twitter as a naturalistic site to examine information contagion, whereas we might be interested in how Twitter is actually a culture and a site of cultural experimentation, whatever it might be. So in my world, we're focused on mapping public communication, the structures and dynamics and flows of communication. So the point of this is that for about 10 years, we've been in a really intensive period of skills development, of exchange of knowledge across disciplines and sort of subfields in humanities and social sciences, and going from a situation where most of us, even in media and communication, operated in a sort of sole humanities researcher capacity to becoming quite naturalised to work in teams, to work with computer scientists, to talk about data. Yeah. So fast forward to about 2014, QUT, along with a bunch of other Australian universities, was successful in securing a LEAF, which is the Linkage Infrastructure, Equipment and Facilities grant, to build something called TRISMA, Tracking Infrastructure for Social Media Analysis, which for one thing, focused on building an Australian-specific and longitudinal collection of Twitter data. Actually, the National Library of Australia was also a partner in that initial phase. So these days, the numbers are a bit bigger now, but we've captured billions of tweets from millions of accounts that we classify as Australian. We can talk about the detail later. I'm going to talk about this more on Friday as well. So, as I said, we have a pretty deep data set of Twitter activity in Australia over that time, and a comprehensive map of follower-followee network structure as well, which I'll talk about what we've done with that on Friday. I won't go into it now. Fast forward again. Last year, it became very obvious publicly that many of the social media platforms were really significantly locking down their APIs, but this has been coming for a while. So, to cut a long story short, the attempts to use advertising to make Twitter run were going on over here, while meanwhile all sorts of amazing social and research value was being generated out of the data over there, and then Twitter caught on that this was monetisable, so they started to restrict API access so that they could sell the data, basically. But then Cambridge Analytica and everything else that's happened since came along, prompting a much more sort of intensive and rapid platform enclosure kind of move where under the foil, I would say, of privacy, platforms have progressively locked researchers out, which, you know, that's their right, I suppose, if the data is monetisable. But also, at the same time, the platforms are quite clearly playing a much more significant role in our politics and our society, and we have less and less ability to observe what they're actually doing. At the same time, quite an immature or naive ethics framework has really evolved and matured, and that's really good. It's making things a bit more complicated institutionally. Part of that is because of really sort of wildly uninformed approaches by some of our colleagues in STEM, but I think the conversation has converged quite a lot. And alongside of all of this, mainly because of Cambridge Analytica, so as soon as something's in the news about social media platforms, we know we're going to be having some conversations around the boardroom table in the Office of Research, Ethics and Integrity. But certainly there's increased institutional awareness of ethical risks around social media data research, but more importantly, a real worry that, for example, breaking the terms of service might be an institutional risk. So I don't have time to go through all this, but lots of really awesome research tools that have been built for Twitter and or Facebook data don't work anymore. But we have a lot to be getting on with. As I like to say, there's never been a better time to be a media studies person, because there's a lot happening. You know, what Felix Stadler calls the digital condition, or Nick Caldry and Andreas Hepp call the time of deep mediatisation, alongside the datification of everything, the growth of sensors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there is a lot to study beyond everyday life happening over here, and then some of it being broadcast on Twitter over there. I think there is a lot for us to do. All of this is being coordinated increasingly by an increasingly smaller number of proprietary platforms that are owned by the biggest countries on the biggest, Freudian slip, the biggest companies on the planet. Don't have time to go into this, but it's all very interesting and challenging. What are we doing about this? Well, so where I think methods are going is there's always going to be still space for API-compliant methods using the most visible platforms. We need to actually return, in a lot of cases, to grey area practices like scraping, like bots. Automated testing is a nice way to put it for institutional purposes. And there's really a very welcome return to qualitative hybrid digital methods, going back to our roots as critical humanities and social science scholars, but really excitingly and most pressingly, the rise of forensic and experimental methods, whether that involves participation from large populations of users who sign up to provide data so that you can see what the algorithms are doing in different user cases. So Algorithm Watch, a fantastic organisation in Europe, does a lot of this sort of stuff. What are we doing at the DMRC? So over this whole period I've been telling you about, we've been progressively formalising a range of digital methods training workshops that they're not curriculum. We do them throughout the year for our own students. We do a summer school every year, although not next year because we're hosting a bunch of big things, including the Academy of Humanities 50-year symposium in Brisbane. So there's going to be a lot of activity around, but here's just a list of the workshops from this year. So one of the things that's happened across this time is that we've now got a number of senior academic staff who have backgrounds in computer science and in linguistics and in media and communication and sociology, all working together. So you can see this hopefully reflected in some of the titles of the workshops there, that we've got this hybrid qualitative, digital, critical, forensic and computational approach, which is just sort of becoming naturalised. But reflecting on it for today is kind of neat, but we've got much more to do. I'll leave it there.
I'm going to just plug in, hopefully with luck. Hooray. Thanks for having me. I'll be quick. Whoops. I'm going to talk about my view, a very my two cents version of, I guess, a vision of future skills and workforce as I see it already manifest in the world around me. I'm from a kind of design creative arts background. I do a lot of work in digital humanities. I do a lot of work with cultural data, but yeah, this is going to be my vision, I guess, of a kind of humanities future workforce. And I'm going to do it through three very cherry-picked kind of case studies, some that will be known to you, some maybe not known to you. Yeah, just as a way to kind of, a way to develop a conversation. These folks, Small Multiples, I don't know if you are familiar with their work. Jack Zhao and Andrea Lau, they have a data visualization focused studio called Small Multiples. They're based in Sydney. I always cite them to my design students as a great exemplar because 10 years ago there was no such thing as a data visualization studio in Australia, and now there are several. Small Multiples are probably the biggest, and they've grown from a kind of, 2 founders to actually like a 20-something person business. And they do lots of really good work. They're doing work with very high-profile clients, and they do lovely stuff. So they're a great success story in terms of a business that's appeared in this humanities and creative arts space that simply didn't exist. This is some lovely work they did for SBS, where they did the SBS Census Explorer, and they've developed a really interesting profile to their practice, which is not just kind of generic kind of data viz. It's has a very strong sense of voice and orientation, and actually of kind of cultural foundation. Jack and Andrea are both first-generation Chinese Australians, and they bring that cultural kind of lens to a lot of their work, which I think is very powerful. So their work with SBS is a great look at how that sensibility can be brought to bear on Australian cultural and demographic data and the way that that gets represented in public. And it's really notable, by the way, that project, that SBS Census Explorer project, that is not an ABS project, right? ABS has nothing to do with that. They take census data and they visualise it in extremely powerful ways. Frankly, I think ABS, they're doing wonderful things with ABS products. They're enriching those products hugely, but they're doing it independently. But they also do other really interesting projects. This is called Hansi Universe. It is a kind of a visual clustering similarity map of Chinese characters. It's not a commercial product. It's a completely independent sort of research exploration, which you could call kind of cultural analytics meets, kind of linguistics, I suppose. Very rich and kind of multimodal project. So as well as mapping this space of characters, it will actually also pronounce them to you. So it's a great way to learn about Chinese language. And they also do projects like this. This project is called Not a Single Origin. It's the only data-driven chocolate project that I'm aware of. So each chocolate in that box reflects the cultural kind of ancestries and sort of mixtures of a specific Sydney locality. So those cultural mixtures are reflected in the ingredients of the chocolate. So it's data-driven, cultural synthesis chocolate. Fantastic work. Everyone knows Tim, right? He's in the room. I'll embarrass him for a second. Tim Sherritt's one of my case studies for this because, his work is pretty amazing. Oh, do I need my internet for this? Sorry, I might just need to turn on my Wi-Fi. I thought my presentation had loaded. Apologies for this. Just need to do this thing. Great. Tim Sherritt's work is probably well known to many of you. If you're not, you should look it up. Tim calls himself a historian and hacker of digital heritage and many other things. I wrote about him in the context of a art magazine a couple of years ago about this project, Redaction Art, and it was quite interesting because I was then able to kind of call Tim a kind of artist, which he was sort of like, am I? Well, maybe I am. This is an incredible project called Redaction Art, where he's using computational methods to harvest redacted pieces of text from archival documents and then compile them together into these beautiful kind of composites. This is a live app that you can browse over there. But Tim also, Tim's projects often kind of, beget other projects, and they kind of, reproduce in an autonomous way. So here are some laser cut things that are the spawn of Redaction Art. Then other people do things. So here's Bonnie Wildey's wonderful Redaction Art dress on the left and some Redaction Art bickies on the right. Note the URLs for your chasing up. So this is not just a solo practice, this is a very networked and collaborative and open kind of practice. And Tim's work is also increasingly engaged with publics in various forms, both through teaching and through direct community engagement. So in this project, The Real Face of White Australia, which is a long-running project, Tim's recently done a sort of crowdsourcing phase of that, so having people actually do transcribathons to actually enrich and add to the data in that project. So that's a very multifaceted kind of practice. Greg Moore is a Melbourne-based data viz designer, runs a business called Creative. Is orders of magnitude creative. Greg's work is, again, kind of data viz flavoured, but it has a particularly urban and spatial kind of lens, which I think is quite notable. This project is incredible if you're not aware of it. It's called Melbourne Forest Visual. It was done for Melbourne City Council, and it visualises the urban forest of Melbourne. So I think it's around 70,000 trees, identifies each tree individually, and it reports on the species and the sort of lifespan and status of all of those trees. But a curious thing happened in, they included the facility to be able to email a tree in this application, which was originally conceived of as a way to report damage to a tree, like a kind of a fix my street, pothole kind of thing, like I'll report some damage to this tree. People took that kind of invitation very literally and actually started writing wonderful and very heartfelt messages to their trees about their importance in their life, about their inquiring as to their well-being and their state of mind, or kind of thanking them for providing shade and, kind of spaces for it. So actually an incredibly poignant and profound project, which arose from the opening up of this municipal data set to public investigation and, literally being able to speak back to that data. This superb work of Greg's, one of my absolute favourites at the moment, was done also for Melbourne City Council, focused on urban biodiversity. It's a study of insects in parks around Melbourne. Just gorgeous, gorgeous visualisation. So again, working with visualisation, but here moving into, I guess, biodiversity. And one of my questions here is, well, where is, are we still doing humanities data now, or have we moved into non-humanities data, and where should we draw that line? Personally, I'm very interested in moving in this direction and towards the world of non-human things and the way that data can provide traces and evidence of that world. So really quickly, just to draw some of those threads together, a few points about what comes out of case studies like these, these practices. Data has some very particular attributes in this work. First of all, it's mobile. And mobile, we're used to it being mobile in the sense that, it's fast, it's kind of, it's frictionless, etc., etc. I don't really mean that. I mean that it traverses boundaries across institutional boundaries, different sort of contexts of application and provenance, and different disciplinary boundaries in terms of knowledge and frames. So data is just traversing those, breaking those kind of membranes all the time. It's very malleable, it's polymorphous, it changes its form, and it is susceptible to its form being changed by people who know how to do that. It's workable, it can be turned to certain ends, it can be applied to certain things. I can make cookies, or I can make a dress, or I can make a web app. All of these things are possible, depending what I want to do. Data is heavy with value and significance. This data is not flippant. It's not kind of, it's not kind of taken lightly. It always has anchors in the world, and they render it powerful. So this data is about stuff. It comes from somewhere, and it matters to us. So it's significant in that sense. It has stakeholders. It has people, institutions, places, things who are deeply engaged with it. And you can't just work with the data without engaging with the things that the data is entangled with. That's what all of these practices show. And data is very often public. In other words, it's engaged with a public realm. It speaks to that realm and it engages in the realm. So it engages in a form of debate, kind of discourse, it also is actually advocating and offering itself up within that realm. So it's kind of open in its forms of practice, and in its forms of publication, actually it's open by default. So then these practices, if I could describe what qualities these practices have, it would be something like this. This is the kind of first thing that everyone thinks about, right? Like if we're thinking about future humanities workforces, I do computational stuff, you know, I code, I work with data, and so I'm probably expected to stand up here and say, everyone should learn to code, or everyone should, you know, develop your technical skills. Yep, sure, absolutely, you can. All of these, in these cases, all of these people do have these skills. But they don't only have those skills. They have those skills amongst a kind of arsenal of other capabilities. All of this work is culturally sophisticated, so it is highly attuned to specific contexts, it sits in specific contexts, and it's critically engaged with those contexts. It's not kind of blithely tripping from one place to another, it is situated in a cultural location and it's working critically in that location. There's a real thread of independence. All of these practitioners own their own perspective. So I'm thinking of the way small multiples draw on their cultural heritage and actually use that as a distinctive voice in data viz. And data viz can often be, tends to be all kind of shiny and a bit kind of characterless sometimes. They are really fighting that tendency very effectively. And all of these people retain creative agency, so they retain the kind of license, the ability to do their own thing, to do independent projects, to do work for hire, to do collaborative work and work that's involved in other larger programs, but also to do their own thing. But of course, the vast majority of this work is collaborative. It involves other people, and for the humanities in particular, I think this just needs to be the new default, because working in a contemporary society, we work with other people. That's the way we work, and we need to be conscious and critical and have our kind of heads up about that. And finally, all of this work is imaginative. It's about data. For me, the part of the romance of data, or however you want to say it, is about potential. It's about what data can do, and all of these people are very systematically and imaginatively kind of exploring that. What can data do? What do I want it to do in this context, in this application, in this situation? Retaining that sort of authorial voice, but yeah, they're providing an incredibly valuable service, because the question for all of us, if we're working in this sphere, is what can data do? Practices like this are ways of mapping that out and investigating that we can draw on. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just inviting everyone back up onto stage, and so we can throw open to questions. We'll finish for a reception at where that will kick off at 5:30. We've probably got about 15 minutes worth of questions, or a little bit more if there's an appetite for it. And we're up in, just so you know what's coming, the reception is in the foyer upstairs. I think you're mic'd there, so if you're okay with those mics, you can answer, and then we've got the roving mics to go. It was a really great set of papers. I mean, in a sense, it sort of starts at that incredibly macro picture that we're sort of interested in, but it's morphed and woven through, I guess, some of the institutional work that you're doing in that intense phase of skills development, and then Mitchell's, densely kind of material sort of perspective on some of the projects and people, and the kind of skills that are inhabiting, people. One of my questions is, and I'll just put it out there, and it might be something that we pick up on, and I don't mean to sort of put Tim in it again, but do we proliferate a Tim Sherratt? Is that what we're looking to do? I mean, how do we, what are we looking to do as a sector in a sense? And what sorts of skills do we need to develop at, a macro scale, at a national scale? And it may not be something that you feel that you want to answer, from what perspective, I guess, and at what scale, what do we need to develop up into the future?
But that'd be a great place to start. I probably don't need to be on. Hello. Yeah, so you could do a lot worse than proliferating Tim Sherratts, but in terms of, look, I don't know how you systematically develop these capacities. I guess I was thinking about the backgrounds of the people I was talking about, and they So Jack and Andrea from Small Multiples are PhD graduates in design with focus on data visualization. Tim comes out of history and science and technology studies. Greg Moore is an architecture graduate with a background in 3D animation and kind of spatial, digital spatial technology. So these people have arrived at the place where they are. They haven't been groomed towards that place in any kind of linear fashion. So I don't know how you systematically develop those capacities other than provide all of the materials and ingredients and hope that people take them up.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think you can systematically develop the necessary preconditions, and really getting different people together is the most important mechanism. So looking back to when the ARC had the research networks and the transformative impact that the Cultural Research Network had on a constellation of disciplines in my orbit, media, communication, cultural studies, anthropology, history, geography, that then saw themselves as kind of a scene. And if we could think of expanding that in humanities and social sciences, but making it really demystifying particularly computational methods, data visualization and so on as part of that. Yeah, so I wouldn't think about formal research training programs so much as how do we get people together to let the magic happen.
I think if we take Mitchell's examples, which are brilliant, thank you Mitchell, great. What I see there are the classic humanities skills, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, all the things that we've done as humanities scholars forever, transposed on a digital 21st century, 22nd century space. So actually, I see core, if I can be old-fashioned here, core humanities qualities and skills, a skill set that is not in the STEM areas, that employers are saying we need more of that in the future. You can't program robots emotionally, actually, or to critically think. So what I'm getting at is that there's probably going to be a mixture. I don't think it's about, creating a whole new set of skill sets. It's about those skill sets that we are all familiar with in the humanities and what we teach our students, actually, being more relevant, funnily enough, into the future. And I think the 3 examples you gave, actually, Mitchell, perfect for that. I mean, they are brilliant examples. Relevance, critical thinking, opening up new ways of looking at problem, and so on and so forth. So, I think it's very exciting, actually. This future is very exciting for humanities.
Okay, we've got a question here, I think.
Mine's sort of a bit of a question and a comment. So I'm Belinda Weaver. I'm now at Griffith University. I think that House has got the same problem that is systemic across all research, which is you do an undergraduate degree and you learn a discipline, and when you come into postgrad and beyond, you actually have to work computationally, and you're divided into people for whom there is a tool. There might be Aleximancer and NVivo or NTLK, and then people who actually have to develop a tool because the tool that they need to do their research doesn't exist. And those people actually do need to learn to code, and they need to learn a whole range of skills. But right across the board in science and health and everything as well, there is actually no research pathway for them to do that. There is no training provided. Now, I've been involved in software carpentry, and some people might know what that is, but it's basically teaching people to code who haven't learned that in undergrad or haven't learned it anywhere. But that can't be the answer alone. The universities actually need to think about incorporating coding and other skills like visualisation, data cleanup, analysis into what is research training. It's not enough to just skimp away from that and not do that. So I think as a workforce we need to think, right, for people who have a tool, these are the tools. For people where there's no tool, what is the pathway that they can get the skill to start developing those tools? Because otherwise we're not going to do the right job. So I think that's absolutely crucial to what your workforce planning needs to look at.
I couldn't agree more. I guess the interesting thing is, what are the jobs? That's the question. We don't know what they'll be. I mean, I take your point. I totally agree. I think that's absolutely right, and that's what we've been told, and universities are aware of it, but it's been done in a very ad hoc, scattered way, as you've illustrated, quite rightly. But I guess part of the challenge is we don't know the jobs that students coming through in the next 10 years are going to be doing. I mean, it's a kind of interesting scenario we're in, actually. And that's why, in a funny sort of way, those core skills of humanities is what a lot of employers are telling us they want. That's why they want that's why they're hiring humanities graduates, because they have got that base skill set that can be taught. They can teach all these skills you're talking about, but the fundamental skills of critical thinking, communication, critical inquiry, collaboration of the sort Mitchell's illustrated in those examples are sort of enduring in a way. But I take your point. I think universities need to be a bit more proactive, but that opens up a whole other question about university training, which we can talk about. It's very important.
Does anyone else want to pick that one up?
Well, yeah, I think we need to move away from everybody needs to generically code, learn to code, to a more ecological, I suppose, understanding of what critical data and digital literacies might be. And for some people that might mean having the confidence to operate a little Python script. For other people, it might mean understanding what Leximancer is doing. So I think you can only do that organically and really grounded in disciplinary knowledges. But most universities, I don't know, QUT does offer a lot of that generic research training in coding, but where people take off is when their imagination and their critical questions come into alignment with something and they just can't stop learning how to do it.
There's a question here, I think.
So it's just a similar question from the previous question. So I feel when you were talking about the skills and especially the digital methods, I feel that there is a gap actually in the humanity and social science that, it seems to me that we have a lot of emphasis on something else, which is established in social science and humanities as, good writing skills, for example, or critical thinking. So in a way that, when PhD students spend time on learning new skills or programming or anything like that, it seems like, wasting their time. Instead, they could, publish some papers or, they would be better off in, be an academic. So people, I think, who spend or invest on learning new skills kind of, kind of disadvantage for them somehow in humanities and social science, because yes, they have good skills, but they could hire, as a professor or someone who they could hire an RA or a computer scientist to do these jobs for them. So it's not really necessary. It seems it's kind of gap here. How do you think about these as a discipline, rather than kind of practices?
I think there's a few things in there. So to take the employability in the academic job market, you're definitely in my discipline, you're at a distinct advantage right now if you have digital literacy, critical digital literacy, and especially you can bring some kind of digital methods competency. I've just anecdotally, I've definitely observed that as a pattern in Australia and in the UK and in Europe on the jobs market. Not every grad student needs to learn to code or even to incorporate directly digital methods into their own research, but being in an environment, if they're studying contemporary media cultures, if they don't understand what platforms are doing and something about how they're working, if they're not above the level of, perhaps certain journalists' discourse on that, then we're not doing our job. But like I said, it's a more ecological model. So not every student does spend a lot of time learning programming. I didn't want to give that impression, but they all learn a bit of it.
And quickly, in terms of whether students are wasting their time beating their head against the wall trying to learn to code, absolutely, if that's not productive, it's not a good idea. But some of the byproducts in terms of the benefits of that I see are just frankly opening up employability outside of the academy in a massive way. So I have a number of excellent students who are actually have really quite well paid jobs as data scientists in the private sector, and that's kind of subsidising and supporting their academic line of their life very nicely, thanks. But also, I'm interested in forms of creative cultural practice for which you can get paid, right? And that's a great aspiration, that I want my graduates to have an opportunity to do interesting, rich, vibrant, creative work which uses their digital skills and which can pay them a wage. That's a wonderful goal. Yeah.
But also, just to Joy's point, there are a few examples I can think of our recent graduates who've gotten jobs in tech companies because they have critical, they understand what's going on in the technology, but they have a really sophisticated critical understanding of the cultural and the socio-cultural aspects of what's going on, and they're there to deal with ethics maybe.
Yeah. Jennifer?
Yeah, thanks. This is a fascinating panel, and I think it's really an important discussion. And it's one in my home institute in Trinity College Dublin, and to a certain extent in DARIAH, that we do have this conversation a lot. We have an industry forum, and we have a number of kind of labs within that, and we have internships in our... So you know, this is something that is familiar in some ways. And I wanted to pose the question, is it that we need to look at the future skills, or is it that we need to look at meta skills? And the reason why I'm asking it that way is because, okay, so we know that employers want what humanities graduates have, and we see the exact same thing in Ireland, so that's not a blip. And we know that when they get in there, they tend to be very successful, and they learn what they need. And I'd almost say, you know, we don't know the jobs. I would almost say we don't know the technology. The technology is going to change fast, and they'll pick that up. You know, we all know, I mean, this is one of the classic things about digital humanities. People say, oh, I need somebody that does this. I'm going to go find somebody to teach it, you know, and they'll follow that. And if there's one thing we also do is we tend to get people who really follow their bliss and, you know how to harness curiosity. So, but there seems to be a couple of gaps. And one gap I think of is there's the policy gap. So, you know, I have sat in a room and had, you know, CTOs of major companies saying, you know, we need to understand people, we need to understand how they work, we need to understand what motivates them. And then my prime minister stood up and said, we have heard this message and we're going to train more computer scientists. It's like, no, they don't do that. No, that's not that. So there is that problem, but also there's the problem on the, so we need to educate the policymakers in terms of what tech needs and what they're telling us, but also, and this is the question of the meta skills, is that we have a PhD student of ours who's now working for Intel, and Intel hired her to be a disruptor. Okay, I don't know if that's her job title, but that's definitely what she's there to do. And she grabbed me at a reception the other day, and she said, Jennifer, the thing that we are not doing is we are not, my cohort, we don't know what we're good at. We don't know the skills we have. We don't know what it means to walk into an environment like this. We don't know how to talk about who we are, and we don't know what the needs are that we can respond to. And that's where I think of this level of the meta skills, because, you know, all well and good that a company like Google has a chief ethical officer, but we all know that that's not going to be enough. You need to find ways of getting that deeper in, and you know, we train people who know about ethics, we train people who know about storytelling, we train people who know about identities, but we're not necessarily training them to apply that in the right way, I think. So I'm just wondering what you think about this idea of skills versus meta skills, because to me, it's that kind of, you know, the courage, the confidence to go out and say, right, this is what you need. That's the bit that can, I don't know, make Tim Sherritts of all of us. I don't know, you know, again, so I'd be curious to hear your responses to that.
I'll just start. Thanks, Jen, that's a great question. So as I said earlier, where we want this document to land is on the desks of our policymakers, and in a pragmatic sense, in an immediate sense, it is through our electoral policy, the Academy, but also we have been talking to a number of shadow ministers who may be our ministers in the coming months, if the polls are correct. So we've been talking to politicians about humanities workforce skill set, investment in it, identifying it, and you know, it's interesting because you know, the publicity around it is around companies, you know, insisting that there should be more recognition. So we feel there is a space for us to go in and amplify that story and emphasise it. So it's just about getting the policymakers to understand, as you say, it's not about training more computer scientists, it's about the humanities workforce. So I think there's some sympathy and an ear. We have some ears listening to us. And they tell us, well, what would you like us to do? What do you see as a... And that's a challenge, you know. Okay, so we have a sympathetic ear of a policymaker. What do we want? What are we asking for? And hopefully out of this report, out of our research for this project, we'll have that much more clearly articulated. And as I said, the British Academy, US Academies have done this quite well in terms of what they've generated. In terms of humanities articulating a skill set, I think you're absolutely right. And it's not immediate to even our students, not even immediate to my colleagues, what skill set we're teaching and imparting until we were told by our universities to identify what the skill sets are. And so now every course we run has a skill set sort of, a sort of list. I think you're right. I think we need to be better at that, and hopefully coming out of our report and certainly of the work of Jean and Mitchell as well, what is it that humanities contribute? How do we tell that story? How can we articulate clearly to the community as well? And I come back to things like Open Day at our universities when the parents come to see our what we do. And 25 years ago, I'm saying what I said last week to parents, we teach students timeless skills that tech bubbles will come and go, technology will shift, and as you say, in 5 years, in 3 years, the technology is going to be different. I mean, etc. But what is timeless are the skills we teach our undergraduates and our PhD students, which are transferable, I think. And so we've got to get better, though, at identifying what that looks like, and as you say, storytelling and all those other things. Yeah, I agree.
What you said.
Just quickly, if by meta skills you mean the ability to sort of be reflective learner and independent learner and to recognise how to acquire the skills you need in an ad hoc way, 100%, absolutely. One of the interesting tensions here is between disciplinarity, which is, the amassing and delimiting of bodies of knowledge and traditions and practices and all that kind of good stuff, which sometimes works against that process of ad hoc skill acquisition, right? So, I can't hop over there and learn that because that belongs to someone else. Whereas for me, data and computation are just vectors that just drive you to hop across and move between these different disciplinary forms. Now that can be risky. There's in terms of scholarship and epistemology and so on, there's risks in doing that. But for students, it's incredibly empowering to realise, hey, this is an algorithm. It comes from this. I understand this. Not only can I use it, I can download it and run it. And hey, I can feed this data through it. And hey, look, I get stuff out. And then they can find out what's going on. So the digital, software and sort of network culture have accelerated the availability both of knowledge and information, but of code, of like executable computation, is now just like right there. So you can just grab onto it and do it. That's tremendously exciting. So I try and induct students into that excitement and get them on that path where they're like, yeah, I can just do this stuff now, and then they find their motivation. So for me, that's where I'm trying to get students to. Yeah.
I think we've got one final question.
Okay, I'm going to read a little something from a piece of research done in the UK a couple of years ago. It's called Mapping the Future of Academic Libraries, and this is to your question, Joy. It was done by SCONAL, the Scottish National and University Libraries. And most of the people who work in the profession that I used to work in the library field have a humanities background. So the top 5 skills that they recognise they've got to be on game with are strategic management, understanding of the research process, relationship management, negotiation, and user experience design. There's a second wave of skills in this, tucked in under that very steep amount of critically important skill sets. And the top one is intellectual property rights. The next one down is quantitative data analysis. Third one, data and library carpentry, data analysis and visualisation. So I think as a profession, that very clearly indicates that combination of skill sets that you're talking about, and that there are other equivalent professional communities across the collecting sector that represent the joining of forces of those two skill sets. But what's interesting here is actually it's a lot of those critical thinking skills that are right up the top, but coming right behind are a lot of what Mitchell's just been mentioning, the ability to be able to get in there and tackle that. So for the panel, I wonder if you hadn't gone into academia, where would your research have led you? What profession would you have gone into?
I've got to go now. It's a very good question. I think I'll have to reflect on that and take it on notice. I don't know. I mean, well, look, as we're saying, we don't know what the jobs of the future are going to be. Our students Many of them will not be in the academy, obviously. Casualisation's killing the academy. That's another issue we can talk about. But I think, you know, for my generation, there were a limited number of occupations somebody could have gone into. Teaching, librarianship, the academy, and for a woman, I think, even when I went through, they were limited. So I chose one of those, but I think for the generation we're talking about, it's very, very different. And so, you know, as a number of people have said throughout the day, we're training people, but many of them won't be in the academy, which is a huge loss to the academy, and don't start me on that. Yeah. But a great boon to other areas.
My answer is that I've already been there, done that. This is my alt career. I was a musician the first time. But I've graduated in 2007 from my PhD, so I probably could easily have found work through the international internet studies community at some social media company or other, and maybe got lucky and was one that stuck around. So I think the future is actually pretty bright in my field.
Yeah, I still look wistfully over the walls of the academy from time to time to the outside world. I can see it from here. No, look, I'm massively privileged to have come into the field at a time where the skill set that I had just happened to be in demand, and I feel insanely lucky, and I feel and I realise that there's a large generation of extremely talented people who are not as lucky as me. So yeah, similarly, I feel like it's about trying to engage people with a huge range of opportunities in a sort of very rapidly changing world, and make all space possible within. Frankly, I think the academy has to get way better at working, at being agile, fast-moving, collaborative in the way that it works with the rest of the world as well, and the way that the universities are talking indicates that they say they want to do that too. So I think there are lots of opportunities in the way that the academy is changing, but absolutely, yeah, we're in a position of privilege.
Okay, that's a wrap. Can you join me in thanking the panellists?